Hey everyone, I'm Madhav Rajan. I'm the Dean and George Schultz Professor of Accounting at Chicago Booth. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to be with us today. It's great that you're able to participate as we welcome Booth alum Michael Armstrong of ViacomCBS to our Distinguished Speaker series. This is, of course, a long-standing Chicago Booth tradition, and the goal of the DSS is to bring together high-profile leaders from the government, from the community, from business, to all of you so that they can share their insights and experience. We launched the virtual DSS last year, just over a year ago, at the start of the pandemic, and it's been really well received by students and by alums across the globe. So we began with great chats with alum like Kurt Del Bene at Microsoft and Tom Ricketts of the Cubs, Jenny Scanlon of UL. And at the start, the goal was to learn about these executives and their firms and how they were responding to COVID. And the series was so successful, we sort of continued it through the fall and in sort of throughout the year. And we've done special events for the people in EMEA, for the people in JPAC. We did events with Ann Mukherjee from Pernod Ricard North America, JP Gan from Inns Capital in Shanghai, Dave McLennan, CEO of Cargill, recently Julia Golden from the Lego Group, and Tom Keck from Stepstone. It's really a thrill, as I said, to introduce today's speaker. Michael Armstrong is EVP at ViacomCBS. He oversees the worldwide television licensing and operations for their global distribution group. And in that role, he manages all the relationships with third-party studios. He oversees the international sales team for formats and the CBS NewsPath service for the global content licensing team. Prior to this, Michael served as general manager of BET Networks, where he drove strategy and operations and oversaw content strategy, multi-platform scheduling, marketing, corporate communications, and operations. Clearly a huge role where he also had to liaise with people across the media network groups in strategy, finance, and research as well. Michael is a Chicago Booth alum, and in 2012, he was honored with the Distinguished Young Alumni Award. Thank you, Michael, for being with us today.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate you having me.
So maybe let me just start with sort of a general question about, I said ViacomCBS, and of course, I talked about BET. Some people, if you Google your name, it comes up as you're in Paramount. So I was just wondering if you could just sort of say how these things fit together. What is the corporate structure?
You bet. If you'll allow me just personal privilege before I get going, given that this is a Chicago Booth event, I just want to tell you and honor somebody that's on my heart today. One of my classmates and dear friends, Courtney Hall, who was a JD MBA in 2003 from Booth and from Chicago Law School, passed a few weeks ago. And he was a big supporter of Chicago Booth, came back, we did some Kilts events together, but more importantly, just a really good human and a good representative of the Booth community. And I just want to say he's going to be on my heart today as we do this event. And I'm really, really pleased to be here because, like Courtney, I always love to be in service to Booth and be able to have an opportunity to share my experiences. So let's talk a bit about ViacomCBS. We're obviously one of the biggest media companies in the world. It is a little bit confusing, I think, to an outsider how we're organized and structured, but I think the simple answer is ViacomCBS is the parent company, and under that there are a number of big iconic brands in the forms of studios like Paramount, but within the studios they also have production units. So Paramount has a group that makes television shows. Obviously they have the motion pictures group, the same for CBS Entertainment. But the difference being CBS Entertainment also has CBS Sports, CBS News, and then you've got kind of your channels groups, which are more of the traditional kind of linear channels, which are both here and around the world. So MTV and BET, Comedy Central, Paramount Network. And then more recently, some acquisitions that are important parts of the company, like Pluto TV, which is one of our advertising video on demand, or we call it FAST now, services, and really an important part of our streaming strategy. And then more recently, the launch of Paramount Plus, which was the former CBS All Access, and we've added a number of pieces of content and strategy to that to create what is our streaming platform.
Thank you. And so we can sort of parse different pieces of that. And again, I encourage the audience to send in questions through the Q&A. We've already gotten lots of questions that I'll go through, but anything that comes up as we're going through, I'd love to hear it. When you moved to this new role, I understand this was a specially created role. It didn't exist before, so maybe you could talk about sort of how that was created, and were there sorts of issues and tensions given that this was newly created when you joined this particular position?
Yeah, no, I don't think that there were issues and tensions. One of the things we do is we continue to innovate and create new opportunities for how we monetize the great content that's created around the company. I came to work and still do work for a guy named Dan Cohen, who runs the Global Distribution Group. And what we really wanted to figure out was we've got this great infrastructure with 20 plus offices around the globe, local sales teams that are in market, in local languages, are selling our content from our multitude of studios around the globe. And so could we find a way to open that up to third-party studios, smaller studios who may have really great output of content? They may have a show that they launch either on one of our channels or a platform like a Netflix or a Hulu here in the States, and really could use a sales team that's world-class to represent that product for them around the world. And so that was the genesis behind the creation of this role. And the evolution was at Paramount Pictures, where I originally started that role. The evolution is as we merged and brought in additional content from around CBS Entertainment and from around all of Viacom, that role became a broader role, which recently I started to manage the teams that represent our formats. They had been legacy CBS, so the CBS formats, and I'll talk a bit about formats. I'll know you'll tease that out a little bit, as well as the news path, which is kind of our news gathering from both our local and national news organization that we offer up to news stations around the globe that don't have people on the ground here to capture the breaking news, or the White House pool or other kind of areas where we provide a service to them with NewsPath.
Maybe touch on the formats then, Michael. What was sort of what does that involve? I know that oversight of that is under you now. What does that entail?
Yeah, I had the luck of inheriting a world-class formats team. The idea around formats in the media industry is essentially that every show is kind of an essence or an idea around this is what the show is going to be. And what you'll find is those shows then packaged and produced in local languages around the globe can do just as well, if not better, in other markets. And so where we have historical shows that have done extraordinarily well, like a Wheel of Fortune or a Jeopardy, where for, in some cases, 20 or more seasons, there's local versions around the globe. Spain is on season 17 of their version of Wheel of Fortune. And so our team both licenses those shows to channels and production companies in those markets, but also works with them as they get the show off the ground, as they make slight changes that make that show work better in those markets then that might not work here. So in some cases, like in Turkey, Wheel of Fortune is more of a variety show. It happens to also have the Wheel of Fortune elements that you or I might be familiar with watching it here, but it has a number of different elements, including music and dancing and guests. So every show, those core of ideas has value. And so our standpoint is we have valuable formats, both in the non-scripted and scripted pile kind of our programming. We then license those to other players around the world. And I'm really happy to say that the team is incredible, and we continue to expand deeper into kind of scripted formats like The Good Wife and Ray Donovan and other formats that you'll see show up in other markets around the globe.
Okay. Maybe just let me ask you about NewsPath. So is the goal that local stations may not have the manpower, the money to produce these, and so you're going to do it for them? And do you do it sort of show by show, or is it like an annual contract, or how do you set those up?
Yeah, it's a good question. Think about it as news breaks all the time, and news gathering is expensive. And really stellar news organization like CBS News has a combination of national and local news gathering organizations that are capturing breaking news. And in Minnesota, as an example, the news breaking out of the Derek Chauvin trial. in Washington, D.C., the news breaking out of either D.C., out of the government, the wheels of government, or out of the D.C. pool, someone in another market, Australia, Japan, Germany, may not be able to deploy resources to be in all those places at the same time, but still want to be able to report what's going on. So they might pull from us an unbranded news segment that we captured with a reporter on the ground in a market for a breaking news story, wrap that with their local reporters talking about that news item of the day. And so it comes in the form of a service where they have access to search for these files, and then as part of their deal, depending on what their deal is, can utilize those files in their reporting both on air and in digital.
Mm-hmm. That sounds fascinating. So you've used international a lot, so maybe I'll start with that. And prior to your current role, of course, you were at BET, and you took BET, Spike TV, you brought them to global audiences in more than 100 countries. What does that actually look like to operationally do a global expansion of that scale?
You know, every brand is different. So I'll speak specifically to the three brands that I spent the most time rolling out around the world, and that being BET and Spike, and also the creation of Paramount Channel, and I'll talk a bit about both. BET, the difference is that you're flying into a market and saying to them, I've got this brand that launched here in the States. It was intended to serve the needs of an African-American audience and those who were interested in African-American culture, but I want to roll it out into your market where you may have a 2% African diaspora population, but where Black culture is dominated pop culture in your market. So it was a very different sale, like in the UK, versus then when you go into South Africa or Nigeria and you're speaking to the operators there, it's not about necessarily that it's content featuring Black people. That's not an anomaly in those markets. It's about content that features Black culture, which in some cases is the catalyst for the world's pop culture. And so it's a very different sell when you're going into those markets. Spike was very different. Spike in the US was initially launched as a brand that was to service the needs of men and the things that they're into. And as we rolled it out around the world, it was at the same time that our branding strategy for Spike was evolving and to service both men and women with really kind of catchy pop culture shows like Lip Sync Battle, which was right at the beginning of us rolling Spike out into markets, into Europe and other markets around the globe. And so it was more about the content and rather than the brand filter for Spike, it was a bit about the irreverence of the brand. And then Paramount Channel really was driven by how do you create a consumer-facing channel from an iconic film studio. And so our first market we launched Paramount Channel was Spain, and it was really about being the best version of this iconic studio in a television channel. And as it rolled out into different markets, it was about getting the mix right on content because everyone doesn't watch the same films. Everyone doesn't want to, everyone's prime time is at a different time. So we would launch different Paramount channels in language, in markets, some dubbed, some with subtitles, according to the market needs.
And is that something you try to work out ahead of time? Do you do focus groups or do you just sort of pivot as you go along? I mean, what's the decision process there?
One of the benefits of ViacomCBS's structure is we have, for a very long time, had local offices, which include local marketers, local research teams. They really, truly understand the market. And so in the case of those three brands, we were not the first brand in from the company. They had, in most cases, had a Nickelodeon, had an MTV. They understood their market and continued to pull the market through a combination of standard first-party data and research, through ethnographies and others to understand what was the best expression of the brand in those local markets.
So in your career, you made a big shift, right? You were doing sales, business development. You sort of moved to international content distribution, which, looking back, I mean, you were way ahead of your time into the super hot area. What drove you to do that? What was the thought process there?
If you look at my career at ViacomCBS, it's really about trying to do something that I can continue to build my toolbox. I had done international distribution, but I had never been this far upstream working with content producers who were looking to essentially get their content on networks for the first time. And so for me, I seem to always be in a position where I'm chasing that next big thing that's going to give me a broad-based view of the media industry. And what I found is that the skills that I've built along the way, even if they were different roles, are very complementary to me then adding additional value or new insights that might not have been added if you're dealing with people that have only been in one particular area of the business for their entire career. So it certainly helped me when I went into channel management. It helped me when I was leading sales teams, ad sales teams, and content sales teams. And it definitely helps me in this role as I'm getting my first exposure in a big way to both our news organization and our broader formats team.
So let's maybe stick to the international content distribution. One of the things you and I chatted about briefly before was just the explosion in international content now, particularly international content being made available to the US and US audiences finding they actually like it. Maybe you could speak to that, and then we could dig into specific examples of that.
Absolutely. Look, I think if one thing COVID did for the world is kind of kept us cocooned in our homes, and in doing so, we consumed a lot of content during that time. And I think given the proliferation of streamers and networks that are looking to continue to satiate the needs of very hungry content consumers, they've taught them how to binge through content really fast. So they're constantly like, all right, what's next? And ultimately the algorithms began to bring some of this international content here in the States up to the top level. And as people began to watch it and experience it, it continued to bring the algorithm to show more people and expose more people. If you go anywhere around the world, for the most part, shows out of the US, the UK have been exported into those markets for decades and decades. Now this pattern of international shows, films, TV shows, some with subtitles, some with dubs, coming into our homes here in the States and actually showing up on the top levels of what's being watched, I think it's only going to continue to expand the remit for international producers or moneyed producers here in the States to think about doing a show in another language as the principal original version of that show. And, I've seen it happen with Lupin on Netflix and 10% out of France, both of those shows. I'm not sure in the environment where you were relying on a content acquisitions person on a network to buy that for one market, it would have seen the same light of day had it not been on a global streaming service. And so there's a lot of factors that I think are making that happen. And I'm really glad to see it as someone that's worked most of my career in global content.
You mentioned the French shows, which have become very popular. Could you talk about maybe content from other parts of the world where you see this is something that's going to explode?
Absolutely. I'll talk about it in a couple of senses. I'm going to go back to formats because I think that's where we've seen US shows based upon international formats in the non-scripted space. American Idol is a version of Pop Idol, and The Voice, I think the original version is in the Netherlands. You're now starting to see shows that are based upon formats internationally, like Your Honor on Showtime. One of our networks was based upon an Israeli format. And we have Telefe in Argentina that's part of our company, and we're looking at formats there that we can bring here and launch English language versions of some of their top shows. I think you're going to start to see a lot more of that. It's happened before. I think Israel is a really great hotbed for formats. We own a company in Israel called Ondemand that's been operating for 25 plus years and doing a great job. And a lot of the top shows that you see coming out of that market, there's a small group of really top writers that are making those shows. And so we have access to a lot of those writers who have new ideas for shows that they want to produce. So co-productions both spread the risk for producers, but I think now more than ever, English does not have to be the dominant language in a show. And I think that's a good thing for all of global production.
So one thing I was reading about recently is that, as you mentioned, there are a few talented people in these countries. There's more and more a feeling that, hey, the top US companies come in, lock them up. And so there is a push in Europe, for example, that a certain percentage of the content has to be produced locally. Is that something you're having to face as well with your efforts?
I'm not facing it only because I'm no longer kind of in the channel management business. I did face it as I was running different channels in different markets around the world. Local governments determine the quotas for how much of that content needs to be made locally. I actually think from a market perspective, the better way is to think about how do you make sure that companies are investing in the best talent in that market and not just kind of meeting a number for what gets made in a local market, because there's a lot of ways to do that aren't necessarily expanding that market. Mm-hmm. One thing I will tell you is I think COVID also put in place the opportunity for production companies to think about different places to shoot new content. A lot of the films that are now showing up both on screens in homes and of course in theaters were shot in the last kind of 12 to 15 months in places like Australia and New Zealand, who had protocols around production that were not as strict because COVID was not as prevalent in those places. That may then continue, I think, down the line, where once you start to shoot in a market and you see some of the benefits, either cost efficiencies and or the talent that's in that market, that may then turn into other versions of places to shoot films and TV shows.
So a couple of questions from the audience that I'll go to, and then I'll go back to some of the earlier ones. Hi, Michael. The proliferation of excellent content over the past 10 plus years is overwhelming. How has it redefined how you win viewers or succeed in the marketplace?
What's the last part of the question?
How do you win viewers or succeed in the marketplace when there's just this sort of explosion in content available? How do you think about, how do you differentiate yourself?
I think there's a bit of understanding who are you making this show for, and really and understanding what platform then are you going to display this show? How are you going to market it? How are you going to do your retargeting of your marketing to ensure that you're getting to the audience to show up and enjoy the content that you've created? But then there's a bit of, really, if you make a show that has an authentic voice, you very well may find an audience that you did not intend for the show. And that's happening, I think, in a lot of ways, something we just discussed, shows out of France. I don't think those shows were made originally for a global audience. It's just that when presented to audiences around the world, they felt they were authentic, entertaining, and they took to them. Mm-hmm. And so it's a combination of both ensuring you have an audience for your show, but probably more importantly, making sure that your show has an authentic voice, and then obviously a really good marketing campaign to make sure, because of the amount of choice that we have as viewers, it's going to rise above the fray and be seen in a timely manner, especially when decisions are being made if you're going to do a second season or a sequel.
Next question says, what is your perspective on the evolution of maintaining linear distribution versus servicing customers entirely DTC through Paramount Plus and Pluto, particularly related to international markets?
So, look, I think distribution is going to be the bigger question that we all need to grapple with. Every piece of content has an opportunity to have multiple touch points in distribution, and it's a combination of being up to the organization that's obviously creating the content, and then the buyers that are licensing the content for platforms. Sometimes those buyers are internal, sometimes they're external, determining what's the best pathways. It may be the best pathway for a piece of content is to have its first expression on a linear channel and then go to a streaming service, or the reverse. It starts on a streaming service and then goes to a linear channel. There's road blocking that happens where sometimes you're launching content that might have a wide variety of audiences, but you want it to reach as many people as possible at the same time, and you air it on multiple networks at the same time. I think you're going to see a lot of experimentation and different companies trying different things. There's going to be no one answer is really where I'm getting at, because the same viewers don't show up to all those platforms in the same week at any given time. That's a rare occurrence. And so you can reach the widest variety of users by having a really good windowing strategy. And that's not new to media. That's been happening for as long as media has occurred.
The next question sort of gets to the question of measurement, which is how do you measure content consumption? I mean, is it clicks? Do you measure length of time? Or can you say whether it's logging on from a phone or is it from a home location? How do you all track and just consumption?
I think it varies, especially as the way that content has reached the consumer continues to evolve. So obviously in television, there's some industry norms around measurement. Traditionally, Nielsen numbers have been the measuring tool that the industry trades on for both advertising sales. I think you're finding companies are looking now at share and how much share of the audience they are able to bring from one show to the next. I think when you're in the subscription business, the direct to consumer, it's a combination of retention. How is that content? Is it sticky enough to retain a certain group of customers for an additional month or two onto the platform before you can offer them something new that allows them to stay? It really varies too much to give one answer, but I think in totality, if you look at all those things, it's really about, is the content making an authentic connection with as big an audience as possible? How are you monetizing that audience? Is it through a monthly subscription? Is it through advertising sales that you offer? So in the case of Pluto, we want audiences to show up to those networks because we then have ads, very much like linear television, that we present to them. And I think it just varies from platform to platform.
So the next isn't a question, but one of our, Brian wanted to give a big thank you to you for hosting the Rocket Man screening at Paramount for the Booth LA Alumni Club a couple of years ago. It says best event I've ever attended. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. I'm glad you were able to come.
Question, what do you see as the future of the traditional movie theater business model? And maybe you could talk about sort of COVID, wrapped up in that as well.
Well, there are a set of questions that, I think the best person to answer, and a set of questions that I think there are other executives in our company that are best to answer that. So I think I'll quote our chairman and CEO of both the studio and of ViacomCBS when they had the Paramount Plus rollout. That question was one that emerged, which was, do we believe in the theatrical model? And the answer is absolutely. It's an important part of the ecosystem. We think there are films that should be seen in the theater, and we'll continue to believe in the theatrical model. They're important partners of ours, and I won't go any further, I think, on that question, other than to kind of send viewers to go see their comments.
Okay, sounds good. So let me see. So the question then is, so this, when I do this, so somebody says, if I were to write and run a new show for you at no charge, what genre, theme, and characters would you personally like for me to write to you? In other words, like what do you have something in mind that you think is going to be successful that you would recommend?
So I missed the first part of the question, but I think I got enough of the gist of it.
Yeah. So this person says, I don't know if it's a he or she, if they were to write and run a new show for you for free, what do you think the genre, theme, and characters that you would personally like to see being written?
What I personally want to see might not ultimately be the most successful show. Here's how I would answer that question. I don't mean to lean on what I said earlier as the only answer, but I really do believe some of the shows that I have loved weren't things that I would have thought I wanted to see. Well, the reason I loved them was they were spoken from such an authentic voice. And so a great example of a show I'll use is I May Destroy You, which came out of the UK. And what I loved about that show is it was extraordinarily authentic to the voice of some of the challenges the creator had ultimately dealt with in her life. And those challenges were delivered with some levity. It had very deep seated issues that needed to be dealt with on the screen, but they were dealt with in a way that was both educational and entertaining and was clearly authentic. And so I would say to the person that asked the question, if you have a very authentic story to tell, I would hire the best writers to help you get that story out in a way that works for TV or film, and tell that story, not worrying about, is there an audience for what I'm going to say, but worrying about, I suspect my authenticity will resonate with a wide enough variety of people that it will be a success.
Okay. Stephen asked, there is so much good content out there in various streaming platforms, and not all of them are profitable. And at the same time, we're already seeing some content re-aggregation happening through platforms like Amazon channels and Roku channels. Stephen says, I'm just curious, where do you see the world in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the world in the next 3 to 5 years will continue to evolve to a more on-demand world. That's not dissimilar to how media has evolved from the very beginning. I think when VHS came along and Betamax, and they were battling it out for what was going to win, I think a lot of people believed that it was going to be the end of going out to the movies because you could watch a movie in your living room on a VHS tape. Well, that was 40 plus years ago, and that didn't happen. But it gave you a chance to watch content on demand, pause it, go get a snack, come back to where you stopped. I mean, if you think about it, we're kind of in that same world now with on-demand services where it's just in the cloud and you're not doing it off of a piece of physical media. So I think the evolution will not be as fast as we might believe it will be to something new and different. It's really about making it convenient for the consumer to be able to consume what they want to see when they want to see it, and have access to as much of it as possible, very likely at the best possible price. And so whatever you can imagine that looks like, I know someone told me the other day, they love that they can, when they park to drop their kids off at an event in their Tesla, they can watch a streaming service right on their screen. That's a version of that. When we get autonomous vehicles, if they come in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe a version of that is binging your favorite show while your automobile is driving you to your vacation 5 hours away. I think there's versions of that, and we're obviously looking into ways that our content creators can play in all those spaces.
So I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about stuff internal to the company. Could you say a little bit about what is the corporate culture like at Paramount? Is it in any sense distinct or unique, that where people would say, oh yeah, that's the way they run things?
You know, I think like any major company with a variety of divisions, the culture varies in every division. You know, Paramount is a film studio, and I don't know if Hollywood has its own culture, but if it did, it probably looks like what film studio culture looks like. I'm new to that space. I came from the corporate office in New York, having worked there for the better part of 16 years. And I was in a regional office in Chicago for 4 years. And I would say the one overarching thing, even when we were Viacom before we became ViacomCBS, and then Viacom again, and then ViacomCBS one more time, one thing that has happened is the culture is very much about bringing your true and unique self to work. And I've always been celebrated to bring my full self to work. That's something that I'm really glad I've been able to do, and probably why I'm here for 23 years and counting, is that I can be authentically Michael Armstrong when I show up, that looks different than my colleagues, and approaches problems differently than my colleagues, and I'm celebrated for that. And that, to me, is the company culture that works really well across all of our divisions. And I've been in offices probably more than many people in the company all over the globe. And I feel that's a unique thread that brings us all together.
So one of the questions was, who are the most important players in a company like Paramount? Who are sort of the key decision makers, if you will?
Well, I think depending on what you're creating, obviously it all starts with the chairman. And Jim Giannopoulos is the chairman of Paramount and does a great job setting the tone for this iconic studio. If you think about Paramount, I mean, we were launched in 1911. I mean, this is a studio that is in Hollywood, the oldest of its kind. And so being able to lead both just the iconic nature of what Paramount means, but also making sure that you're creating content that's going to meet the TV audience, the film audience, emerging talent, and finding ways to support emerging talent. The most important players obviously probably hold the key to the budgets and are green lighting the content that we create. But I find that even that is very much a team and collaborative model. And so other than calling out our chairman, I don't know if I want to start calling out any more important players.
I completely get you. So let me ask another question that kind of gets to that, which is that if you look at the studio, the operation side, business side being optimized for the future, is that sort of happening? And is there an older generation in the business that's kind of resistant to change, wants to keep doing things the way it always was? How does that play out in your view?
I think it'd be inauthentic for me to say that inside of the industry that we're in, there aren't folks that are in the industry that like it how it is, and there's not folks that are kind of on the other end pulling us into the future. And I think it's a matter of finding the right balance between how much of what we're doing should we continue to do the way we've done it, and how much should we point to the future, and how fast should we move to the future? Because who knows if the thing that everyone is saying is the new way to do it is going to be a sustainable business model. And so I think having vigorous debate, I heard you on one of your Chicago Reconnects talking about this vigorous debate that we do at Booth. I think it's the same way inside of our company. Through vigorous debate and bringing your best data and your best ideas to every meeting, to every initiative, you get to the right answer. And the right answer is going to look different from company to company, and that's okay. Something is going to win ultimately.
So we've had a couple of questions just asking about Booth and sort of how do you use your Booth education? Has it helped you in your role as you've sort of gone up the corporate ranks?
Yeah, no question. I really enjoyed my time at Booth. And in some ways, it's hard for me to separate my time at ViacomCBS from Booth. And I'll tell you why. I started at MTV Networks, a division of ViacomCBS, in our Chicago office at 401 North Michigan. I started in October of '98. Within 3 months, I was sitting in my first class in the evening program at Bleacher, attached to my building at 401 North Michigan, learning the ways and principles of Chicago Booth, open thinking, collaboration, challenging, but with data, and making sure that you were open to others' ideas. And that really has stuck with me early in my career at ViacomCBS, such that when I left Chicago and was promoted to a marketing role in New York, I was able to both bring with me my experience from working at the company, so the intercompany culture and ways of how we got things done, with that broader knowledge and obviously all the great professors and classes that I had, and marry those two together and start to build my career. And I do credit Booth with giving me a lot of great methods for how I approached the thinking of big problems that we were trying to solve. Because if you think about the early 2000s, it was really about coming out of analog into digital cable. That was the big challenge. We go from 35 channels to 100 channels. What are we going to do? How are we going to market new channels? How are we going to put them together? We've had 10 of those since then, of the business evolving, and I've been able to really lean on the great education that I got at Booth to approach those challenges with the right mindset.
Thank you. So we have relatively few students who go straight from booth into entertainment. So what sort of drove you to that? And is there any advice you would give for students who are thinking of entertainment as the field that they would love to go to?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more than there were even 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that, that we had our internal Facebook that you could go and find booth alums that were in the media industry or current students. And because I was in the evening program, I was listed in the guide as someone that worked at MTV Networks. I believe Chris McGurk at the time was the chairman of MGM. So I got all the calls. No one called the chairman of MGM. And I ended up spending a lot of time with students figuring out, is this media cable thing something I should consider? If you think about where media has evolved over the last 20 years, we really could use and are benefiting from the skills of MBA students. And because it continues to challenge ways that we evolve the business to remain a really, strong industry. And I think the skills that I attained at Booth, and obviously the current students at Booth, would be able to apply those in so many different ways, given that we're thinking about new ways of, from the technology of delivering services, new ways of interfacing with companies and creating unique deals that might not have existed before. It wasn't a traditional B2B to C was kind of the way we did business. It was, we sell to a cable company and they are packaged channels, and they sell those packaged channels up from other companies as a package that you bring into your home. And then we make money both on the advertising and the affiliate fees from that deal. It worked that way for a very long time. There are a wide variety of ways to monetize content now. And what we're hoping is that Booth students that are looking at the industry look at the future of what you think you could bring to the conversation that maybe is not being talked about. Because you're both a consumer of content, which is a nice thing about being in the industry that I'm in, and you're a great thinker. And so bringing those two things to bear, I think people can have very successful careers in this industry.
So you've been great at engaging with the school and talking to our students and our alumni. And I know that you did a virtual session with students of the media and entertainment student group this year. And you said you relished your memories of having worked at, through some of the greatest TV milestones, Real World on MTV, the Chappelle Show on Comedy Central. Can you speak a little bit about which of them were your favorites and why?
I'm still a huge fan of the Chappelle Show, no question about it. I was a fan of The Real World. The Real World came out when I was in undergraduate. And I remember at the time, think about, obviously, it came on at a particular time on a particular night. That may be new to some people on this call, but that was how TV worked. And I did not have a VCR in college, so you had to be there to watch it. But watching this experiment unfold of reality television and these young people that were like me and some that were not like me, finding a way to work together and live together in a home, that was just an incredible experience. Today, it's just called reality television, but then it was this new thing. And I'm really glad that MTV gave birth to this format. And then more recently with Paramount Plus, bringing that original cast back as a reunion show for The Real World. It really is full circle. But definitely that show and the Chappelle Show were two of my favorites. And then again, I just finished watching Your Honor, and I would say it's a highly entertaining show with Bryan Cranston, and he does a great job. So we have a lot of content. I could play favorites with so much of it, but I really, really love those three.
Was there any backstory to the change of the name from CBS All Access to Paramount Plus? Was the notion that Paramount was a bigger brand name internationally, or what was the rationale for that?
Yeah, I think if you think of big tent, how do you put a consumer-facing brand that is highly recognizable? I will tell you, when we first were rolling the channel out in 2012, and we were thinking about, and I was working, we had a world design studio out of Milan that helped with the idea for the branding for the network. And Paramount was clearly a brand that no matter where you are in the world, people understood it to mean high quality. They might not be able to name what film came from Paramount, what film came from a Warner or a Sony or anywhere else, but they knew that mountain and stars. And when you said Paramount, they understood it to mean entertainment, high quality, kind of high production values. And in particular, I'm gonna watch this because I trust it. And I think that was the idea behind the evolution of it, of obviously CBS All Access here in the States to Paramount Plus, which we had versions of Paramount Plus internationally with that same kind of perspective.
We had a question that we got in advance. With the price of premium content increasing dramatically, how do you think about the balance between licensing premium content versus creating original content?
Look, I think there's room for content at all price points. Obviously, premium content is a lot more expensive to produce today than it was 5, even 10 years ago. But I also think there's a lot of really creative content creators who are creating in places where it might be less expensive to create content that are making incredibly entertaining content with high production values. And I think a good programmer, whether you're programming a streaming platform, a network, is always going to find that balance of high production value, potentially high cost, and a lower cost product, and finding the best mix of how to bring those products to the consumer. And so we license all versions of content, irrespective of how much was spent to make it. We want it to be high quality and authentic, and those are things that we license to customers internally and externally.
One of the questions was again about COVID, not about specifically theaters, but just when will the entertainment industry, quote, catch up from the impacts of COVID-19? Sort of how do you see the next, say, 12 to 18 months going?
I don't know if it's a matter of saying catch up. Certainly production slowed during COVID. COVID protocols were put in place and productions were restarted. And I think one of the things, and I'm happy to say, because I live in the global licensing group, it was the licensing of content that already existed that really helped get a number of channels and platforms through this time, because, I'm still entertained watching The Godfather. It doesn't matter that it was made almost 50 years ago, it's still a very entertaining film. And so when you think about all of the content that's been created that sits in libraries of companies like ours, there's a lot of things I haven't seen. So there's an old saying of new to me. There's a lot of stuff that would be new to me that maybe I missed watching 5 years ago because I was busy with my kids or busy with the job. And now I can binge it and watch it, and it's just as good as it was then. I think about my 16-year-old son who's watching all the stuff I watched in the 90s for the first time and loving it. So I think there's a role for content to fill the gaps when we have disruptions like we had with COVID. I hope it was a once in a lifetime disruption and that we don't have another global pandemic in my lifetime. And I think productions are back in a really big way, being shot in markets all over the globe.
Question was, from your perspective, what is the most interesting format and why?
I mentioned Ray Donovan, which you think that's such an iconic show. How could you make that in another market? But we actually already have announced we're doing a version in India of Ray Donovan. And I just think that's really interesting because the characters are going to be different, but the essence of the script and the shows are effectively Ray Donovan. And so we also have, for many years, have done I Love Lucy in places like Latvia. We did The Good Wife in Korea. And then one interesting format that we did a couple of years ago here in the States was Hollywood Squares, and we did a hip hop Hollywood Squares on VH1. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to reinterpret and reimagine formats in different ways. And I'm really excited, again, to see how different producers and creators can take a format, keep the essence of the show, but make it all their own.
And I presume when this happens, the issue of contracts and residual rights becomes a huge issue. Is that stuff you get involved with, or is that like a whole separate?
Yeah, no, it's not as issue. It's the very essence of our business. So again, I've got a great team that does this day in and day out, and they understand how to price those formats in those markets, how to make sure they're servicing the customers. so that when they're first creating their local version, we have sometimes the producer would come in on set, help them to make sure they've got it right, and they're executing the format the way that's true to the show. And then over time, continuing to work with them as they evolve the show or as they have multiple seasons. And so, Wheel of Fortune in Spain, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, is on its 17th season. And it's very much its own show, but it's one of these things where you almost, probably if you're an 18-year-old in Spain, you don't know it without it. You think that's the original version. And so those things I don't see as issues as more than opportunities for us to learn and figure out ways to continue to get the most out of our intellectual property.
It used to be back in the day that a lot of shows were simply dubbed, right? You would take a foreign show and dub it. Is that changing? Is subtitles sort of more acceptable now than they used to be?
I think subtitles have been more acceptable in some markets for a very, very long time. I know in the Netherlands, if you go to watch something at the movies, you're typically watching it in English with Dutch subtitles. There's a high level of English understanding in the Netherlands. Whereas in other markets, there are multiple voice actors that dub the content, and it's a longer process, but they literally are playing that part. There's a great documentary called Being George Clooney, if you haven't seen it. And it touches interviews with all of the voice actors around the world that for years have played George Clooney in all of his multiple Hollywood parts. That'll give you a real good sense of the dubbing world.
And some of them are pretty famous in their own country, right? Like people know George Clooney's voice, I presume, through that person.
Their voices are as famous as the actor themselves. They may walk down the street and you don't know who they are, but if you get them on the phone, you're thinking you're talking to your version of George Clooney, whether you're in Germany or Italy or the Netherlands. It's a really, really fascinating look at the importance of the voice acting and the craft of voice acting. Because it's not just dubbing. It's not you or I reading the script in a local language. It's literally you're acting the part and making sure that you're bringing the authenticity to that part.
We have a question. I'm not sure exactly how to, I'll let you answer it. Question is, can you tell us exactly what it means when you quote acquire content? What does that mean?
So some of the language means multiple things. So if I say we're acquiring content, we might be licensing content for our ability to use it on our platforms. And so we might acquire content for a period of time, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. And then that content and the ownership of that content might go back to the creator. We may acquire content in the early stages and actually take ownership of that content. And then the person that's creating it is a producer that is receiving fees and likely then, depending on how it's negotiated, residuals for that content, depending on how it's used. We may acquire, I already mentioned formats, I won't speak more about that. We may acquire content from a library that has a lot of finished product where we're bringing that into our library, and those deals happen all the time. So there's a lot of answers for that, and those are at least 4.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you a question about stuff outside of your work. I saw that you recently joined the board of Canada Goose. What was sort of the reason you did that? Just the company you found interesting, or is that something you want to do more of? We'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think I'm really excited to be on the board of Canada Goose. It's a fantastic company based out of Toronto, Canada. You're in Chicago, so I don't think much explaining is needed to understand the value of our performance luxury jackets. I suspect you see many of them around campus. It's a very well-run company with a great executive team. I think for me being on the board, it's an opportunity for me to think about what I've done over my career and how I can add value as a voice in that boardroom. And that's definitely something I've wanted to do as I've continued to move through my career, is to be able to be in a boardroom and be able to add value as a member of that group and be among great executives, both at the company and that are also on the board. It's definitely something I'm happy to be doing at this time.
So you used to travel a lot. Because of the pandemic, you haven't either. Maybe just give us a couple of shows that you binged that you really liked, And then what are things that you do outside of your work to that are passions for you?
I'm a golfer, not a very good one. And I'm a skier. I grew up in Colorado. So traveling for work has led me to a number of different places where I've had a chance to both golf and ski in different parts of the world, which is a lot of fun, but not really something I had a lot of time to do because, quite frankly, I have a family and I don't want to be gone for a very long time. And so it's a matter of getting into a market. I typically would fly on an overnight flight, land in a market, work the day, get over the jet lag really fast, work a couple days, and then fly home. But when I've had those opportunities to do that, and when I have a chance to do that here, it's something I really enjoy. Obviously, my wife and I have a great group of friends that we like to do things, the same things that anyone else likes to do. Hopefully soon go out, have dinner, visit with one another, travel. And then I think I mentioned some of the other shows. One show that I have been catching up on that I haven't been able to binge for a while and really glad to caught up on is This Is Us. It's a phenomenal family drama. And I saw on the news just yesterday that next season is going to be their last. But it's someone described it as the tear-jerker family drama, and it definitely is that. You almost cannot believe these are actors that are not the real people they're playing. And that actually shoots on our lot. So even though it's not a ViacomCBS show, they rent the Paramount lot and shoot This Is Us. And I think my first week on the Paramount lot, I saw Mandy Moore walking by me on the phone, and so it's been a really exciting business to be in, to be able to have those kind of encounters.
And I presume there must have been shows that came to you or content you passed upon, which you later sort of felt like, really, I shouldn't have done that. Is there anything that comes to mind about something you wish, like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that?
Never. We always make the right decisions and green light the right content. I'm actually not in a lot of green light rooms. My career has been on the other side of the business of ultimately monetizing that content. But I will tell you one quick story, which I think is, I'm not speaking out of school. It's in the press. Lip Sync Battle, as I mentioned. If you think about that show, that was born out of a segment from Jimmy Fallon's evening show. Even before he took over The Tonight Show, his late night with Jimmy Fallon, they started doing that with John Krasinski and Stephen Merchant. And then it went over to The Tonight Show with him. I suspect, and obviously I would imagine, he originally pitched that show inside of that company and someone passed on it. But Spike TV in the US, I know the day they got the pitch, they signed that show. And it happened to be the same time we were rolling Spike out internationally. And we actually were able to license that in about 30 versions around the world. So if you go to YouTube, I'm sure you can find lip sync battles that were done all over the globe. People pass on shows that they don't think will work. It happens to us all. I suspect you hope you get more wins than losses.
Michael, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. This has been incredibly interesting, entertaining, and highly informative. So I greatly appreciate your ability to just be honest and direct with us and to take all the audience questions. Thank you so much. We're obviously very, very proud of everything that you've achieved as a Booth alum, and we wish you continued success through your career.
Thank you very much, Dean. I really appreciate you having me. I appreciate those that took their time today to come and watch the session. And I look forward to continuing to do more and more with Booth, and very proud to have it as my business school that's on my resume.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for attending today. See you.
Take care.